Channeling Molina. We are back with part two with Miss Sophia Unver. She is running for the Justice of the Peace in Precinct 6, which covers most of Denton County and Castle Hills and a great variety of area, but a lot of where our South Asian community currently resides. Sophia, thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, we were talking before. Oh, sorry. We were talking before we took a quick commercial break. We wanted to cover some really deep topics, and some of those topics include, understanding how the justice of the peace actually impacts the community in terms of economics. You deal with evictions and truancies and things of that sort. But we were learning a lot about the community, and we were sharing some incredible stories about what you've learned when knocking on these 4,000 doors and meeting your neighbors, and how our government is not so far-fetched as to think that the people that are surrounded by you, your neighbors, are the people that are creating and comprising of what government is. And so it takes all of us, and it takes a collective effort for us to actually make an impact and live in the communities that we deem safe and a reflection of who we are, our ideals, and the type of community that we want to build for our future and for our children.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's not so far removed, from so much of our daily lives, because even Justice of the Peace Court is where you get a lot of your important documents, right? Like you want to get your marriage certificate, you want to get some access to a lot of important documentation that you might need. You go to here to go get it. And so it can mean, taking time off of work to go down there to wait in line to get access to that information. Might have to come back another day because you don't have something appropriately, or it can mean having access to that information online so you can make sure that you're doing things, like e-voter files or whatever that case may be, e-filing, so that everything is still safe. Again, we want to make sure that we have proper safeguards even when doing things electronically, but that the average person can access that information, and the website itself is, again, serving a little bit closer to 2026 than like maybe 1981 or like whenever the beginning of the internet was, because if it's a complicated system, then people are not going to access it. They're going to always feel like it's annoying to interact with their government. And think about when people think of DMV, like no one goes, yes, I had a great experience. People know that they're going to have to
go back.
Yeah, they know they're gonna be like, oh man, it takes forever, and I had the wrong paper, and I didn't know, and they didn't take it. They wouldn't take the, like it's just so many things. And when we have these experiences, then they impact how we see our government functioning. There's a reason why in Zootopia, like when they go to the DMV, everyone there is a sloth, and everyone, regardless of if you're a child or you're an adult, you laugh because you're like, wow, I felt like that was a really relatable experience,
Right.
but it doesn't always have to be that way. Again, I think we've become a little bit too accustomed to things, like some things just being inefficient. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, the private sector can only do so much, right? And, obviously we don't want government to take over everything, but there are certain things that government should be, responsible for, and in an efficient way. And so a lot of that has to do with the people that we empower and that we, vote into office. I think that we as a community have kind of missed that boat completely. After 9/11, everyone was kind of told not to speak to the media, to kind of, stay in your own little bubble. And, 20 plus years have gone by, and we're still not having those, rightful discussions around public policy, around, feeling as American as we should feel. And then we get situations that happen like the ICE crisis that's happening, or that happened in Minnesota. A lot of that is because people are not integrated in government the way that they should. They don't understand policy the way that they should. And then they get in front of, a federal officer and start blocking traffic, and, all these things just start perpetuating on themselves. And then violence ensues and all that, because people don't understand their rights. And so, or the right channels in order to, create a more safer dynamic to solve these problems. How do you kind of see that part of it? Because, going back into, dealing with your neighbors and working with government, what are the lessons that you've learned? Because, this is not your first rodeo. You served, under the Obama administration. You served under Salman Bojani. You worked at the state capitol, which is where I met you, and you're just doing some incredible work. And you're raising a family in between and doing all this incredible stuff. So, talk to us a little bit about your journey and kind of the main lessons that you've learned as it relates to government and how government functions and how to optimize those processes.
Absolutely. I think it's a definitely real experience. Post 9/11, I think a lot of people did just, you know, take a step back or maybe weren't as visible or as vocal about issues that they felt. But I think two things. One, I say this a lot, but I think that public service, I mean, I'm very proud to have been a public servant both at the federal and state level. But public service is glorified customer service. And
Mm,
the best thing that you can do is, how can you connect the person who's reaching out to you, whether online or in person or over the phone, with the resources that they're asking for. And that's going to be the best experience that they're going to have. They're not really going to care what necessarily like party you're affiliated with. They're going to ask and think about who was able to actually get things done. And I think that's the most important thing. And when you can get things done, one, you're not going to be able to do it just on your own, right? It's a little bit of knowing where things are so that you can connect people quickly, but also connect them in a way that's meaningful.
yeah.
So I think that level of experience is very important. That you know how not just that county government works, but how local, state, federal, but also what your nonprofit and your business communities look like and your communities look like, so that you can connect them. JP6 is a very diverse area. It covers Castle Hills, Carrollton, a little bit of Plano, and a little bit of Dallas. We don't have one specific majority group. So we have a mix of white, black, Hispanic, Asian, um, and we have a flourishing and beautiful Korean community here. We have a flourishing and beautiful South Asian community, and that's diverse too, both religious and also culturally. And so there is an opportunity there also of, you can offer resources, right? You can make sure that you have translation or translators available, but also thinking a little bit ahead of that. How can you make sure that the court in itself appeals to folks so that when they see someone who maybe looks like them, even has a basic understanding of the language and culture, they themselves can feel a little bit comfortable sharing with you what the context of what they're needing, rather than just saying, I'm here for this and translating that exactly.
Yeah.
I think many of us, if we're immigrants or we're children of immigrants, we know we spend a lot of time filling out paperwork on behalf of our parents because we're asking them really serious questions and we're like, I don't know if I'm equipped for this, but context matters so that you can do that properly. So I think there is a level of knowing your community that matters there, but also it's a matter of, really owning that we're Americans, and what is more American than saying my government needs to be better for me,
Yes.
right? And that means also that we can ask better of our government. So we don't just always have to take the scraps of what is being offered. We can say that we're not being served because we also know that there are a lot of underrepresented communities. And we can also talk very realistically that there are a large group of us, and by us I mean the collective us, who are afraid to ask for resources given you know the the presence of ICE in our communities, right? There are a lot of people that I talk to that say that they're afraid to reach out for help because they worry that will flag their families for something.
Right.
And so there is a real threat of fear that people have. It's not enough just to say, oh, don't worry about it. Like,
Mhm.
people are, that's their real life. I know people who, I mean, in very seriousness, are very public figures, but that they carry their passports with them because they are worried. And so I think there is a level of understanding that we have to have of what various realities exist in our communities, and make sure that we can, be accessible to them, but also offer in a way that, again, does not create additional barriers when we're trying to help. But we actually ask the community, is this a service that you would like? And if so, what is the best way that we can present it? Again, it's a lot about user experience, and I think that we can do a better job there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And in order to kind of do that, you have to get up and vote. You have to get out and vote. And early voting started today.
Yeah.
Why I really appreciate your time today, because it's early voting literally started today, February 23rd. It's going to the 27th.
So early voting has been happening since February 17th, but this
Mhm.
is the last week of early voting, and it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., February 23rd to 27th. And yeah, it's a crazy time. And you know what I tell people too when they say like, "Yeah, I'll go vote," I'm like, "But it's not just you,
It's your
right?
family,
Let's say
it's your neighbors.
it's your has to be a family event." And I know that's hard, but you have to start building habits sometime. So let's pick this election to do that, because think about like in a I was talking to a group just yesterday, while breaking our fast, and I was like, there's 5 of you at this table.
Mhm.
5 of you could go vote. Imagine if all of you also took your spouses. That's 10 people. Imagine if all of you took your one grown child. That's 15 people. You have now, that's 5 to 15 is a big jump. And in these
That
local
swings
elections,
elections.
local elections, that can make or break a lot of things. And primary voting, I think of it kind of like the draft. You're picking your team, and whoever wins in the primary, that's who goes toe to toe in November. And so this is like the best time that you can, really choose what you want, and it will literally sway the electorate, because if you are choosing specific folks, you're choosing specific issue areas that matter to you, that is what then the various parties and also candidates will want to appeal to the voter. So it's, again, we talk about user experience, and in business terms, about purchasing power, and as a voter, that is your power. You're exercising it right there. And primaries are generally won because they have very low turnout. This is a very special year in Texas as well. We're seeing really high turnout in Democratic primaries. Um, really high in Dallas County, Harris County, Tarrant County, in Denton County too. And the last primaries we had, I think over the course of the first 5 days, we saw an accumulative 5,000, right? So
Mhm.
over 5 days.
Mhm.
In just the fifth day alone, we had 5,000 votes.
Wow. Wow.
So the numbers are very, very high. People are very motivated. It is very wonderful to see. I mean, it's really invigorating to see how many people are turning out. But again, it's like this is a habit. Like you just have to build it, and voting early is, you have so many more days to do it, so much more flexible time. Um,
And
and
you're in and out. It's not,
you're
you
in and
don't
out.
have
There's like
any.
no line. And
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately, Texas changes our voting situation a lot, and not for the best, in my opinion. But early voting, especially in Denton County, you can vote anywhere in the county.
Yeah.
So many people, especially nowadays, they don't necessarily work where they live, right? They might work in Tarrant County, and their house is in Denton County, and by the time they get home, life, kids, just being tired,
Mm.
it's not always possible to vote at your polling location on election day. Early voting in Denton County, you can vote anywhere in the county. It's very flexible. You have more time. There's weekend times as well. And so I always just say, like, people are like, I'll do it. I'm like, just do it tomorrow. Just do it tomorrow and get done. Then
Get
don't
it
even have
done.
to bug you
Yeah,
about
yeah. Don't wait till the third. Right. No, absolutely.
Don't wait. Don't wait. Please don't.
Well,
Please don't.
what this really means to me is, this is a great time for democracy. People are actually believing in democracy in ways that they never did in the past. And so the
Yeah.
confidence in our system, in the way that our system is, which is, a democratic republic, right? We have, representatives that go out and, do a lot of the heavy lifting, that, write the legislation and, enact policies and things like that. People are really believing in the system, which is why there is much better voter turnout. So, it's incredible. You are one of the most competent public servants I've ever known in my life, and I've interviewed a lot of and met a lot of public servants. So,
Very. Thank you.
it's the truth, and we would be remiss to not have you serve in the role that you believe you can make the greatest impact. Sophia, before we end the show, I want to talk about the local economy. And as you said, Denton County is one of the fastest growing economic hotspots in northern Texas, right? Northern Texas itself, there's going to be so much infrastructure coming in. They're talking about the secondary Wall Street coming in into North Texas as well, being based in Dallas. Housing, everything has just been booming, and in the face of that, I think one of the biggest challenges that I personally think that you might see is in the wake of AI, there's going to be a lot of, right now, currently unemployment rates are still very low, but the joblessness is increasing, right? People are just not hiring for, traditional roles the way they used to. People are going to have to transition into more creative roles or creative, ways of making money, get the gig economy, going back to vocational schools, things of that sort. In the interim, you might be seeing a huge uptick in evictions, right, or housing crises that might be happening. People that took out these large loans, living in the nice neighborhoods, but no longer can afford it for whatever reason, or they got laid off, or things of that sort. How are you approaching that, and what do you see as the future of the economy? Because I think there's going to be more dollars that are going to be put into the economy, but maybe perhaps by fewer and fewer people overall per capita is my thought. And that's kind of a scary place to be. How are you thinking about it, and how do you approach it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that we know not only is coming, but is already here. So even with all that growth, unfortunately, there's just not as much affordable housing that's available. Yes, housing is being made, and more of it is coming, but mixed use housing, affordable options, what that looks like is not as prevalent as it really needs to be based on the jobs that are available in the area. And yes, maybe unemployment numbers haven't surged right now, but that it is also true that, wages have not increased. And so, what we see when we help and offer, free tax prep services is that there are a lot of people who are utilizing these free services and that they have multiple jobs. So we're talking about gig economy. People are trying to, um, you know, be very creative while also doing, maybe they're doing they have a full-time job, and they might even be like a teacher, for example, but then they're also doing like Ubering or, um, you know, grocery delivery on the side to pick up extra cash. But again, they're trying to do it within the jobs, not only within the job market, but also within the hours that exist in a day. And yet they're still not able to have enough to really sustain, the realities of today of living, which is rent, but also utilities are increasing. Yes, we talked about that ice storm. A lot of people's utilities increased. Well,
Mhm.
your salary doesn't just increase because that has happened. The cost of childcare is really expensive as well. I mean, it is very difficult for a lot of working families because they're like, we're just trying to get by on what our basic needs. And unfortunately, that's very difficult. We're already seeing, at the federal level, because I serve on the board of the United Way, we have, various leadership groups, like, in addition to the housing and homelessness working group. And we already see that there are changes in trends at the federal level of how they are funding HUD.
Mhm.
And so, there is changing of what qualifies for HUD relief and grants and services, because there's a lot of county and state dollars that are dependent on those federal dollars. And if those federal dollars aren't coming, then those state dollars won't match. And so, again, I think having that knowledge of what differences and how impacts of federal, state, county, and local dollars can have on your community, it's very important then to have those connections and networks within your community to be able to leverage what you know.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing from the federal level regarding HUD is that there is more emphasis on workforce.
Yeah.
And so, I already have, relationships with folks in the workforce community about how we can, talk about bringing those resources to the court so that folks who are facing these situations can at least get connected with services, because again, the federal grants and the federal dollars that they might have leaned on before are not existent,
Mm.
so or they're slowly going away. So we can either again, pretend that that's not happening, or we can try to be as proactive as we can with what we know, with what we have. And I think that's what we have to do. And I know you mentioned, people are excited about, candidates running, but I think it's because there are more and more candidates who are running for more local positions because they can actually have an impact. The reality is, the higher in office you go, the bigger team you have to work with, and the harder it is to get things done.
Yeah,
That's not to say that we don't need to that's not to say that we don't need to keep trying. We absolutely do, but the reality is you're not going to be able to, deliver on your campaign promise very quickly when you're working with 200, 400 colleagues. But at the local level, you can make a lot more of an impact, and you can do it with in
almost
a timely manner.
unilaterally.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just as a Peace Corps, absolutely, as long as you're falling within state bounds. But even with your city council, even with your school board, I mean, there are a lot of positions locally that uh, folks can do a little bit more with. And I think also when you have people who, are not just talking about these issues of like, this is what we're reading in the news, but they're like speaking from experience. Like, yes, this is how hard it is. This, my utility bill is going up, childcare cost is this, like this is what's happening to me, this is what's happening to people I know. I think then you are more invested into fixing a solution rather than just talking about something at like an arm's length.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Let's end on a positive note. The silver, the silver lining to all of this, I think is, although, it's kind of the way that I think about the global economy is if, the US sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold kind of thing, right? It just
Yeah.
exacerbates so much further. In this case, it's really interesting because the Texas economy is probably one of the, if not the strongest economy in the United States. And specifically, it's northern Texas. And so, whereas we are going to be seeing some of these challenges where HUD is going to have to step in, we're going to have to be very close in monitoring and helping our neighbors, as these challenges come forth. It is nothing compared to some of the other communities around
Oh,
the United States and other states that are facing way more dire situations and consequences. And so, there is a message of hope here that, although, you are going to be, overseeing this and you're going to be seeing a lot of challenging cases and situations, overall, the community is thriving, and I think that within the context of what we're seeing today with AI coming down the line, now, this is pre-Optimus. Wait till we start getting humanoid robots involved in everything.
gosh.
And everyone has their own humanoid robot. And, that's going to really change the dynamic of economics, but the cost of economic units for everything is also going to decrease, right? So when we think about, consumer goods and services and things of that sort, that there's going to be a huge impact where things are going to eventually get way more affordable, which is going to be a utopian situation. But, between now and then, there's going to be, there's almost a decade, right? If not
Yeah.
more. And so,
And I
please,
think
please.
also, like, I mean, I think sometimes we see the communities we're in, right? So I mean, I think when you go to some parts of Precinct 6, yes, you're like, I mean, you look around, you're like, if you've ever gotten to, like Legacy West, for example, I mean, it's not in Precinct 6, but it's not too far out because of our communities and how we're broken up. You're like, it is like 2 p.m. on a weekday. Like, does no one work, right? Everyone's like
What is
grabbing lunch.
everybody doing out? Yeah.
Like, or if I remember driving and like running an errand, I'm like, how are this many people like on the road? Like, no one works. Like, what's going
Yeah,
on?
just like hanging
But
out,
it's
like
just,
running errands.
yeah, like what's going on? Like, what is your job? I want that job. But I think it's just also like you see again whatever community or whatever demographic you're in. And so while that may be true that yes, parts of Precinct 6, even parts of Castle Hills, parts of Carrollton are doing well, there are still a large number of people who are not. And I think again, I think within our South Asian community, sometimes, we like I come from a very working class family, but I have relatives who, doctors, lawyer, engineer, that stereotype. And so it is true, but that's not to say that there aren't still a large percentage, not only within our community, but within our larger community that unfortunately are very hand to mouth, right? Like as soon as that paycheck comes in, I mean, it's going out basically that same day. And so that reality does exist, and it's very real for a lot of people. And I think the problem is that we don't always see it, and so we don't know that it's there. But it is, and I think there's a lot of power and also um, knowing what those numbers are, knowing that data. Even as we compare, as I'm saying, like, precinct 6 handles like a quarter of the county's evictions. Like that's a lot, right? Like that's a lot for one area. What's going on there? And so I think that data can be very powerful if shared in a way that you know relates to the average person of what our local economies are actually facing. And I think when we're able to highlight that and spotlight that, we're actually able to address it, um, because that's the reality. But again, when we're not personally impacted, or when our communities isn't personally impacted, we do feel like it's worse somewhere else.
Right.
And while
And
it
it
may
feels
not be
like
worse
sometimes,
overall,
yeah, it feels like
yeah,
sometimes it's only happening to you, right? Like
yeah,
you're the person that's getting the brunt of all of it, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Mm. No, that's interesting. So, Sophia, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. We
No,
wish you
thank
the
you.
best of luck. Everybody, get out there and vote in the primaries. These
Yes,
things are so
yes.
important.
If you
Do
are
not
in
take this for
Carrollton,
granted.
yes, yes. If you are in
What was the
Carrollton,
actual voter turnout? Because I know that you have some of the numbers, right?
yeah, yeah. So we've seen like record numbers here in Denton County. Like I mentioned, just from like day 5, we had 5,000 votes cast just on that day, which in the past years, that's how much has taken 5 days to get to.
Right, right.
So we've had record turnouts.
What would you
But
give
again,
our community specifically a grade if you were to give us a grade of where we are and how
we're
well we're doing to show up and
little
vote?
a little slow to move in, but I will say, I think having someone on the ballot that folks relate to or see, and it's been funny as I'm knocking on doors, you're like, okay, who is this person? I'm like, me. I'm the person.
I am
That
Sophia
lady is
Amber.
me. I'm like, that's me. Like, oh wait, what?
Yeah,
And they're, and so they do feel um they feel a sense of pride, which I think is really like humbling for me too, to say, like, I'm from your community. But it's
yes,
always really important to share also, like, we're in this larger community, and like I'm your neighbor and these are also your neighbors. Like we are all each other's keepers. And we're only strong when we all stand up for each other. So come out to vote, and it might not be that you're impacted, but it might be that your children are impacted. It might be that their friends are. And so it's very important that we make our voices heard, and not just you and your household, like take your whole household, right? Um, I think to my parents, like they know what's happening in Bucks County politics all the time. But when we're talking about locally where we are, the connection isn't there. But I
right.
think for more of us, it is. And I think it's more about how, like, our ownership of our Americanness, right? Like we are invested here. And so it's just about bringing folks out. Again, early voting is still happening from today until February 27th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. You can vote anywhere in Denton County. There's like no lines lately, so it's really great. You can't take your phone inside, so I recommend either printing out some voter recommendations or writing it out. You can take a cheat sheet with you. You just can't take your phone.
Right.
And you just need your ID to get in. And yeah, if you're in Carrollton, Castle Hills, parts of Plano or Dallas, all within Denton County, my name is Sophia Navarre, and I'll be on your Democratic ballot. So you will need to ask for a Democratic ballot because I'm not on the other one. And you can vote there for Justice of the Peace for Precinct 6.
Wonderful, wonderful. Sophia, thank you so much for joining the show tonight. I don't know what is happening with technically with my camera. Yeah, I'm
There you
back.
are.
All right, everybody, go out. Please participate. Do your democratic duty as a citizen. This is the prelims, but it's really, really, really important for us to start here, start now. And this is our American journey. This is our American story.
Yeah.
And we're finally writing our own narrative. And this is the beginning of that. And so we're so proud that you're representing us, Sophia, and keep on keeping on, because you're one of the best in the business. So thank you.
You're so sweet. Thank you so much for having me on again, Sean. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. That was Sophia Unver, Precinct 6th Justice of the Peace. Let's vote her in. Let's get her done, and let's get out there and get our vote in. We're going to take a quick commercial break.
Yes,
And we'll
please.
be back.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Let's do it. All right. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages. Here we go.
आप सुन रहे हैं रेडियो आजाद, हम सफर, हमजाद, रेडियो आजाद।